Hey guys, tonight we begin with linen and moonlight, dim lamps, soft shadows, and the quiet hum of the Nile just outside the window. If you've had a long day, this is your cue to settle in, slow your breathing, and let the past do the heavy lifting. We're opening the door, gently, to the bedrooms of ancient pharaohs, where love, scandal, and statecraft all wore the same jewelry. Let's set the room first, because good history starts with furniture. Egyptian royal bedrooms were not cavernous movie sets but human spaces. Cool plastered walls, floors softened with woven mats, and low beds framed in wood, often acacia or imported cedar, legs carved as lion paws because subtlety was not exactly a royal priority. The mattress was laced cord, topped with stuffed pads and fine linen. Egypt did linen like Italians do suits, breathable, bright, and aggressively ironed by the sun. Instead of pillows, you had a headrest, curved wood cradle, neck perched just so. It looks uncomfortable to us, but to an Egyptian, it was both practical and symbolic, lifting the head like the sun lifting over the horizon. Nearby, a chest for cosmetics, a tray of unguents, a lotus blossom in a shallow bowl because fragrance was theology here. Everything smelled faintly of kaifi, resin, wine, honey, basically a temple's worth of incense blended into bedtime. Now, who exactly is in that room? Egypt likes its titles. The king is Nasbiti, he of Sej and Bi, essentially ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt. He's also the living Horus, which is a polite way to say his job description includes be a god on weekdays. Sharing the space, sometimes literally and often ceremonially, is the HMT Niswalbia WRT, the great royal wife. And yes, the grammar sounds like stone because it was. Her name and titles appear on walls, statues, scarabs, and every expensive surface that could hold a chisel. If the pharaoh is public sun, she is patterned moon, fertility, diplomacy, ritual partner, and crucially, king's mother in the making. In Egypt, that last title hits different. King's mother outranks everyone forever, which is why mothers in statues often hold their adult sons like slightly confused toddlers. It's not infantile, it's ideological. We need to talk about the sibling thing. Royal sibling marriage appears with a straight face in Egypt because divine families, Osiris and Isis, for example, married within the family business. The logic is simple and not unique to Egypt. Gods marry gods, royal blood stays royal by marrying royal, and in case anyone's confused, the paperwork is carved in stone. Did every pharaoh marry a sister? No. Did many do it when it made dynastic sense? Yes. The point was continuity. If your cosmic brand is order, stability, mayat, you do not toss the crown across the courtyard because your cousin from Memphis shows up with a nice jawline. Royal unions shored up succession. A sister could become great royal wife. Foreign princesses might enter the household as diplomatic spouses, and high-status Egyptian women could rise through favor and fertility. Is it romantic? Sometimes. Is it political? Always. Speaking of diplomacy, picture a shelf stacked with tablets, the Amarna letters, soft clay frozen mid-negotiation. Foreign kings write to Amenhotep III and Akhenaten like pen pals who are also mildly offended diplomats. They offer daughters, ask for gold, complain about late shipments like Bronze Age customer service. Those daughters became wives of the king, living in palace compounds with their own staff, their own gods, and a lot of time to compare imported fashions. The Egyptians, with classic Egypt energy, rarely sent Egyptian princesses abroad. The ideology was clear. The sun doesn't set, it receives visitors. Foreign brides entered Egyptian space and Egyptian ritual, not the other way around. While we're on compounds, let's gently de-inflate the word harem. Later languages gave us that term. The Egyptians had their own vocabulary and structures. There were women's quarters and palaces, there were estates to support them, there were houses of women tied to temples and performance troops. Seclusion varied by period and by status, and the picture is more admin spreadsheet than steamy novel. A harem in the Egyptian context is best understood as a complex household. Royal women, children, attendants, tutors, scribes, security, storage, gardens, and an accounting department that could probably audit a god. It's a town with linen. And while pleasure existed, humans are humans. The primary outputs were lineage, ritual presence, and political options. Love could color the edges. Strategy inked the lines. Back to the bed. Hygiene and beauty mattered because cleanliness was also piety. Shaving body hair, oiling skin, lining eyes with kohl to reduce glare and ward off infection. Function met form. Wigs were artistry, with tight curls or long plaits, scented cones melting slowly during banquets like very fashionable candles. Food, too, had its bedroom cameo. Figs and dates for energy, honey for sweetness, lotus for fragrance and mood. You can call them aphrodisiacs. An Egyptian might call it Tuesday. The ritual of preparation, the bath, the oils, the linen, was half the point. The body was a small temple. You freshened the shrine before the god entered. Yes, that metaphor is doing a lot of work. Let's float over to theology because in Egypt, love and legitimacy share a headrest. The king's children weren't just heirs. They were proof that the cosmos remained in tune. Creation myths, from Atum's self-generation to the siblings Isis and Osiris, taught that life renews itself within the family of order. When a pharaoh trumpeted a divine birth, he meant it. Hatshepsut famously had reliefs carved showing the god Amun visiting her mother. The child conceived would be the future king. The message to elites was simple. You are not simply obeying a human queen, you are obeying the result of a god's weekend plans. Was everyone convinced? Probably enough of them. Egypt excelled at performance. Ceremony wasn't decoration, it was engineering for belief. And because we're doing bedrooms, let's address affection. Egyptian love poetry from the New Kingdom is frankly adorable. Lovers call each other sister and brother, which is a poetic convention and also, awkwardly, sometimes literal for royals. The lines are soft. My heart longs to go walking with you. More garden stroll than tabloid headline. This matters because it reminds us these people had full emotional lives under all that ideology. Yes, a pharaoh might marry for reasons that look like a property merger, but he could also write songs, send flowers, and pace at dawn like anyone else. The difference is that his dawn pacing gets carved into limestone in 24-point hieroglyphic. Now, scandal. We won't sprint, we'll saunter. The harem conspiracy under Ramesses III sits out at the edge of the timeline like a warning label. A secondary queen, often identified as Ta, allegedly tried to elevate her son by undermining the standard succession. Papyri preserve the trials. Officials, scribes, and women of the household drawn into a court case. It's all remarkably bureaucratic for a palace thriller. We'll treat the details lightly later, but for now, note the lesson. Behind ritual calm is a management problem. Who controls access to the royal person controls everything. Doors, keys, and schedules can change a dynasty. That's not a murder mystery, it's logistics with eyeliner. If you're waiting for Akhenaten, of course he's coming. He moves the capital, revises the state cult, and poses in family scenes hugging his daughters like an over-earnest gallery installation. The Amarna period gives us some of the most intimate royal imagery in Egyptian art. The king and Nefertiti under the Atene's rays, children on laps, kisses on cheeks, propaganda, yes, also a rare peek at royal tenderness crafted for public consumption. Did Akhenaten marry one of his daughters later? There are inscriptions that suggest elevated statuses. Egyptologists debate specifics. The broader pattern stands. Royal intimacy served royal theology. If you're building a new cosmos, you start with the family portrait. Then there's Tutankhamun, who has been doing press tours since 1922. Genetic studies suggest his parents were siblings. His own marriage to Ankhesenamun was within the close royal circle. 2 tiny mummified fetuses found in his tomb speak to the fragility of dynastic hopes. Inbreeding was a strategy with costs. That's the dispassionate version. The human version is quieter. A young couple in their mid-teens trying very hard to please a country and a pantheon. Biology didn't always cooperate. History rarely offers grief counseling, but you can hear the silence between the lines. Let's slide back to daily rhythms, the unglamorous, soothing parts. Royal households ran on timetables, dawn offerings at the temple, paperwork with viziers, petitions, banquets, ritual processions. Somewhere in that schedule are domestic moments, a wig adjusted, a bracelet clasped, a cuticle oiled. A great royal wife meets envoys, inspects workshops, oversees nurses in the cap, the royal nursery, checks on a garden where henna stains hands and citrus and sycamore shade the walk. A foreign bride receives tutors in language and etiquette, writes letters home, learns to smile at the right gods. Children play with toys. Very fancy cats judge everyone, and a scribe notes that the linen delivery arrived in triplicate. Romance expresses itself through logistics. A private garden, a pavilion by the lake, a boat ride at dusk with musicians. Think stringed harp, not Spotify, lotus blossoms on the water, a thin crescent moon. No one needs to say date night, but everyone understands the calendar entry. Of course, power kept a hand on the door latch. Sons meant continuity. Daughters meant alliance. Both meant future. You see this in the inscriptions that identify women with relational titles: king's daughter, king's sister, king's wife, king's mother. It's relational by design. Identity is networked, not individualistic. The modern eye wants first names. Egypt hands you a flowchart. Yes, it's a little clinical, and yes, people still fell in love inside it. Contradictions are cozy in Egypt. That's part of its charm. A quick word on privacy. The ancient palace wasn't quiet. Servants, guards, scribes, tutors, hairdressers, perfumers, stewards. Life happened in company, but hierarchy created pockets of hush. Screens, inner rooms, pergolas, doorways watched by trusted women. Privacy was a privilege, not a default. That's why access is everything in Egyptian politics. The person who decides who sees the king has real power. A mother, a chief steward, a favorite wife, each could shape outcomes by shaping calendars. The bedroom is not only where people rested, it's where priorities were whispered and promises were made in the kind of voice that never gets written down. Let's let a few names float by because names make the linen feel real. Hetepheres, mother of Khufu, whose bed canopy and silver bracelets still glow in museum light. Ahmose Nefertari, matriarch of a reunified Egypt, deified after death because apparently excellence was hereditary. Tia, wife of Amenhotep III, whose scarabs read like press releases, documenting festivals, lakes dug for her pleasure, and the international correspondence that treated her as the power she was. Nefertiti, inevitable and enigmatic. great royal wife, pretty in profile and effective in policy. Anka-Senamun, whose letters hinted fear and calculation in a world that kept changing the rules. Each woman navigated a system that asked her to be icon and human at once. Most did both quietly. Some left ripples in stone. And how did the night end? With order. Lamps doused, doors secured, charms placed. A knot tied with a protective formula. A Bess amulet grinning at the foot of the bed to chase away nightmares. A cat allowed to ignore instructions. The great royal wife sleeps on linen that took months to weave. The king on linen that took even longer to iron emotionally by priests. In the stillness, you hear the river, the palm leaves, a distant hymn from a night temple. And somewhere a scribe is still awake, imagining the heading for tomorrow's dispatch. All is well. Mayat holds, linen count reconciled. We'll keep the pace steady, because this series isn't a roller coaster. It's a late-night train along the Nile. Next, we'll drift toward Amenhotep III's Golden Court, where the royal bedroom becomes a diplomatic inbox, and toward the Amarna years, where the family portrait becomes a theological argument with sandals. We'll meet queens who mother kings, wives who outlast husbands, and daughters who become political weather. The scandals will stay quiet. The facts will do the talking. And if we smile once or twice at divine PR, that's between us and the ibis-headed HR manager. The Nile keeps flowing, palaces keep rising, and linen keeps multiplying. Egypt has never met a bolt of linen it didn't want to iron flat enough to cut paper. By the time we reach Amenhotep III, the so-called dazzling son of the 18th dynasty, the royal bedroom is not just a space for sleeping. It's a diplomatic showroom, a fertility theater, and occasionally a very awkward group chat conducted in cuneiform tablets. Amenhotep III's reign is dripping with gold, literally. His scarabs brag about how many lions he hunted before breakfast, which is basically the Bronze Age equivalent of a flex on Instagram. But behind the animal counts and building projects sits a queen who quietly overshadows him. Ta. Ta is no anonymous consort tucked away in the linen closet. She is depicted alongside Amenhotep in statues of equal size, which, in Egyptian art, is basically shouting joint credit only. Foreign kings wrote to her as if she personally handled Egypt's inbox. Her seal impressions appear everywhere, and her name was so well known that even later pharaohs remembered her. What does that mean for the royal bedroom? It means Ta wasn't just there to produce heirs. She was political presence, spiritual partner, and the kind of spouse who probably reminded Amenhotep that his lion statistics were less important than his international correspondence. The Amarna letters, clay tablets filled with correspondence, give us a window into the marriage as diplomacy vibe. Rulers of Babylon, Mitanni, and Hatti send daughters like Amazon deliveries, complete with instructions on how much gold should come back in exchange. They whine about late shipments, beg for jewelry, and sometimes complain about the seating chart. One particularly spicy letter has a foreign king griping that the Egyptians won't send princesses abroad. His argument is basically, if I send you my daughters, why won't you send me yours? The Egyptian reply, in silent hieroglyphs, was, because we are Egypt, that's why. Now imagine those foreign brides arriving at Egypt's gates with trunks of clothes, their own gods, and probably a faint sense of dread. They enter a palace where the great royal wife already reigns supreme. They get titles like king's wife or favorite, estates to support them, and rooms in the women's quarters. But they never outrank Ta. The diplomatic wives were useful, but the great royal wife remained anchor. Egyptologists sometimes debate, were these marriages intimate or purely contractual? The answer, of course, is both. Humans are humans. But the architecture of power meant the great royal wife decided the emotional weather forecast. If Tia smiled, everyone was sunny. If Tia frowned, even the imported princesses probably developed sudden headaches. Let's float forward to their son, Akhenaten. Akhenaten is Egypt's professional disruptor. He takes the stable linen-pressed order of Egypt and says, what if we threw out the playbook, moved the capital, and redesigned religion overnight? And everyone else mutters, of course he did. His bedroom, at least in imagery, looks different. Gone are the stiff, formulaic carvings of kings sitting alone like stone mannequins. Instead, the Amarna art style shows him with Nefertiti, lounging with daughters, kissing babies, playing on laps. It's the most family photo album Egypt ever carved. The Aten, the sun disk with its little hands, shines rays directly into their laps. It's a PR stunt, yes, but also a theological claim. The divine family is right here, under your nose, eating grapes, cuddling toddlers. Imagine being an ordinary Egyptian scribe. Your job for generations was to carve images of the king smiting enemies or making offerings to gods. Suddenly you're sketching the king kissing his daughter on the nose. That's either adorable or deeply confusing. Of course, because it's Egypt, intimacy also carries politics. Nefertiti isn't background. She appears almost as central as Akhenaten himself. Tall crown, sharp profile, full titles. She co-signs theology with every pose. If Ta was Amenhotep's equal partner, Nefertiti doubles down. And then the family tree gets complicated. There are inscriptions that hint Akhenaten may have elevated one of his daughters to unusual status later in his reign. Egyptologists debate whether this meant ceremonial partnership, political necessity, or something closer to dynastic weirdness. The evidence is fragmentary, but the pattern of pharaohs marrying within the family continues its awkward march. To them, it was cosmic continuity. To us, it's eyebrow-raising. The great royal bedroom was both cradle and cosmos. Now, step aside to the women's quarters of Amarna. They weren't passive. The estates supporting them were enormous. Weaving workshops, food production, scribes keeping records of linen bolts that probably rivaled modern spreadsheets. Women had staffs of attendants, entertainers, and priests. The so-called harem was not a lounge of reclining beauties. It was an economic and political engine. The royal women of Amarna oversaw resources on a scale that made them power brokers in their own right. When Akhenaten dies, the story gets murkier. Tutankhamun, still a child, takes the throne. Ankhesenamun, his wife and half-sister, is left as young widow. Her letter to the Hittite king is one of the most remarkable texts in ancient history. She basically writes, I have no son, I do not want to marry a servant. Send me one of your sons to be my husband and king of Egypt. Imagine the diplomatic inbox that day. Egypt's queen sliding into foreign DMs with a marriage proposal that could have rewritten geopolitics. The plan collapsed. The Hittite prince died en route, likely assassinated. But the letter reveals something crucial. Royal women, especially widows, could act boldly, desperately, and independently. Ankhesenamun wasn't a pawn. She was trying to steer the throne. The fact that she failed doesn't erase her audacity. Now let's drift back to the bedrooms themselves. Because while the politics swirled outside, these were lived-in spaces. The bed frames were carved with lion paws, the linens perfumed, the walls decorated with lotus and papyrus motifs. The royal couple might dine in private. Bread, beer, roasted duck, dates, honey. Musicians might play softly, harps and flutes, while attendants fanned away insects with palm fronds. And behind it all, ritual. The pharaoh's body was a sacred object, the king's skin anointed with oils, the queen's hair perfumed, amulets placed near the bed. Every act of intimacy doubled as an act of cosmic order. To renew life in the bedroom was to renew Ma'at, balance of the world, which, frankly, is a lot of pressure for anyone trying to sleep. But Egypt thrived on pressure disguised as ritual. Let's take one more example. Ramesses II, later called the Great. His building projects stretch across Egypt like giant resume entries. But in his bedroom, the cast list is staggering. He had multiple wives, among them Nefertari, who received a temple at Abu Simbel, and numerous children, possibly over 100. You can imagine the nursery situation. It must have been less bedtime story, more census project. Nefertari, though, stands out. She wasn't just a name on a wall. Her temple places her image equal in size to Ramesses himself. Her tomb, QV66, is a masterpiece. Walls covered in painted scenes of her in the afterlife, preserved with colors that still glow. This wasn't just affection. This was monumental love carved in stone. The royal bedroom here wasn't only crowded, it was tiered. Some wives ceremonial, some political, but a few, like Nefertari, cherished. The takeaway is simple, but Egyptian in its irony. The bedrooms of pharaohs were crowded with politics, perfumed with ritual, structured with hierarchy, and yet also carried traces of very human affection. Amid the lion-leg beds and linen inventories, you can still hear laughter of children, whispered words between partners, and sighs of queens calculating their next move. Let's float gently to the close of this section. The torches burn low in Amarna. The letters lie stacked in clay archives. The royal children sleep under linen while the Aten's rays fade into dusk. Tomorrow, the rituals continue, the politics resume, and the scribes sharpen their reed pens. But tonight, in the hush of royal chambers, the forbidden mix of love, scandal, and power quietly shapes the destiny of Egypt. The palace grows older. Walls still gleam in plaster, but the paint flakes if you lean too close. The river carries gold and grain downstream, but the empire is fraying at its edges. And in the quiet halls of the pharaoh's bedroom, love, scandal, and strategy still meet under linen sheets. We arrive now at Ramesses III, a king who thought he was replaying the golden age of Ramesses II, but in truth, his reign was more like a second-season reboot, with less budget and more drama. He fought invasions, he built temples, he carved his name everywhere, and yet his private life produced one of the most remarkable documents in all Egyptian history, the so-called harem conspiracy. Now, first things first. Harem, again, is our word, not theirs. The Egyptians called it the Ipet, the women's quarters. It wasn't only wives and concubines lounging around. It was a functioning household with managers, guards, and accountants. But yes, it included royal women. And sometimes royal ambition spills into sharp corners. In year 29 of Ramesses III's reign, a group within the palace plotted to kill him. The main instigator seems to have been a woman named Taye, a secondary wife. Her son Pentawar wanted the throne, but he wasn't first in line. So Taye did what ambitious royal mothers have done in every dynasty ever. She tried to rearrange the succession. The plan involved magic spells, wax figurines, and letters smuggled in and out of the women's quarters, which, if nothing else, proves that palace mailrooms have always been too busy. How do we know this? Because the trial records survive. Not on Netflix, unfortunately, but on papyri. They're written in a style that's both dramatic and bureaucratic. The accused was brought He was found guilty. He was put to death. It reads like a cross between court minutes and a very dry gossip column. The details are foggy, as ancient trials always are, but the outcomes are clear. Dozens were implicated: wives, officials, servants, some executed, some forced to commit suicide. Pentuer himself likely took poison. It was messy, but written down with the same flat tone as linen inventory. What about Ramesses III? For centuries, we assumed he survived the plot. His monuments kept boasting, after all, but modern CT scans of his mummy revealed something the papyri only hinted at. His throat was cut deep, nearly decapitating him, which means the conspiracy actually succeeded. The paperwork just decided not to dwell on it. The bedroom, in this case, was battlefield. Access was everything. Who could approach the king while he slept? Who could smuggle in a letter? Who could whisper in his ear? Tia and her circle weaponized the intimacy of the women's quarters, and the fallout shows how dangerous royal domestic life could be. Let's float away from daggers for a moment, because not every queen's life was scandal. Some were quiet, powerful presences. Take Nefertari, wife of Ramesses II, who we touched on earlier. Her tomb is so magnificent that it still glows with red, blue, and gold. Her titles proclaim her as mistress of the two lands, and for whom the sun shines. In the intimacy of palace life, she must have been a favored partner. Ramesses built her a temple at Abu Simbel equal in size to his own, a statement carved in sandstone that affection could become architecture. Or consider Ahmose Nefertari, centuries earlier, who was deified after her death. She was mother of a dynasty, God's wife of Amun, and held a religious office that gave her independent wealth. In a world where pharaohs strutted as living gods, some queens found their own paths to power through ritual roles. Their bedrooms were not just spaces for producing heirs, they were command centers for influence. As the new kingdom waned, queens kept adapting. By the time of the 20th dynasty, the title God's Wife of Amun had become one of the most powerful positions in Egypt. It tied women directly to the cult of the chief deity, which, to put it bluntly, meant access to serious temple revenue. These women lived in Thebes, in houses and estates that functioned like shadow palaces. Their bedrooms were not next to the king, but they still anchored politics. The intimacy was spiritual rather than physical, but just as potent. Meanwhile, in the palace, life went on. Beds were still carved with lions' paws. Linen was still washed in the Nile until it gleamed. Amulets of Bes, the squat, grinning protector god, were still placed near beds to ward off nightmares. Cats still wandered across mats, deciding unilaterally which chair was theirs. The ordinary rhythm of Egyptian palace life, preparation, fragrance, sleep, ritual, carried on, even as dynasties rose and fell outside the door. And yet, scandal always lingered nearby. The papyri from the harem conspiracy reveal details that sound eerily modern. There were love notes passed around, secret meetings arranged, men bribed with promises of gold and promotion. It's ancient gossip carved in ink. But the stakes were nothing less than life and throne. For us, it's tempting to imagine these bedrooms as exotic or romantic. For the Egyptians, they were practical spaces with occasional bursts of danger. A bed might be where the king rested, or where a plot began. A cosmetic chest might hold coal for eyeliner, or wax figurines used for curses. Domestic objects doubled as political weapons. The line between intimacy and strategy was thin as linen thread. Let's float gently into the lives of royal children, because bedrooms weren't just for parents. They were nurseries too. The palace nurseries were filled with small beds, toys carved of wood, balls of cloth, miniature animals. Some toys had pull strings. Others were shaped like animals that could wobble across the floor. We found tiny ivory clappers, rattles, and doll-like figurines. Children of the palace grew up with both luxury and danger. Play in the morning, dynastic pressure by afternoon. Imagine being a little prince, climbing onto a lion-footed bed while servants hover nearby. Your toys are carved by artisans, but every move you make is watched because you might one day be king or a little princess, surrounded by nurses and attendants, knowing your hand in marriage might seal alliances across the Nile Valley. Childhood existed, but always under the weight of cosmic expectation. So, what do these later dynasties teach us? That love in Egypt's royal bedrooms was always wrapped in power. Queens like Nefertari and Amos Nefertari could shape dynasties. Conspirators could weaponize intimacy. Children could become pawns before they grew teeth. And through it all, linen was washed, perfumes were poured, and cats ignored instructions. The irony is delicious. Pharaohs built temples to eternity, wrote inscriptions about divine order, carved their names deep into stone, yet their lives could still be toppled by a whispered plan in the quiet of a bedroom. Ramesses III, conqueror and builder, undone not in battle, but in sleep. It's the contrast Egypt does best: eternal grandeur outside, fragile humanity inside. As the 20th dynasty faded, Egypt's bedrooms remained crowded, with wives, children, attendants, diplomats, and sometimes enemies disguised as friends. The empire was shrinking, but the private world of pharaohs stayed tangled with love and scandal. Let's rest the scene here. Torches burn low in palace corridors. Scribes tuck papyri into chests. The great royal wife drapes linen across her shoulders. The pharaoh stretches out on his lion-foot bed, amulets at his side. Somewhere beyond, a servant whispers news. A cat leaps silently onto the mat, and the night hums with the mix of devotion and intrigue. Tomorrow, more temples will rise, more letters will be written, and more rituals performed. But tonight, the bedroom is still the quiet center of Egypt's storm. The torches of Thebes burn lower. The stone walls are still painted, but the cracks show more than they used to. The great age of the new kingdom has slipped into memory, and Egypt drifts into centuries where the palaces shrink, the gold runs thinner, and the bedrooms still whisper of love, scandal, and power. After the Ramesside line stumbles, Egypt enters a time of instability. The Libyans arrive, the Nubians rule, the Assyrians march through, and finally the Persians treat Egypt as just one satrapy among many. It sounds chaotic, because it was, but in the midst of it, royal bedrooms still mattered. Queens continue to carry titles, priests continue to marry off daughters, and the daily business of linen, fragrance, and diplomacy goes on. Even in decline, Egypt's traditions cling like sand to sandals. By the late period, we see women holding power not just in palaces, but in temples. The god's wife of Amun becomes practically a queen in Thebes, commanding estates, wealth, and ritual authority. Often unmarried, these women wield influence through ritual celibacy. Their bedrooms are not conjugal but ceremonial, still sacred, still powerful, still spaces of political weight. This blending of domestic and divine sets the stage for what comes next. Outsiders stepping into Egyptian crowns. Enter the Ptolemies. When Alexander the Great sweeps through in the 4th century BCE, Egypt becomes one more jewel in his diadem. After his death, his general Ptolemy grabs Egypt like a collector claiming the best vase at a yard sale. He takes Alexander's body to Alexandria, builds himself a dynasty, and calls it legitimacy. The Ptolemaic kings are Macedonian Greeks, but they learn quickly that ruling Egypt means sleeping in Egyptian linen. They adopt pharaonic titles, appear on temple walls making offerings to gods, and present themselves as heirs of millennia. And in their bedrooms, they follow traditions familiar and strange, sibling marriages, dynastic rivalries, and scandals that make earlier conspiracies look almost polite. Take Ptolemy II Philadelphus. His very nickname, Philadelphus, means sibling loving, not in the metaphorical sense. He marries his full sister, Arsinoe II. It sounds shocking to modern ears, but for Egypt it was continuity. A Macedonian Greek could pose as Egyptian pharaoh by adopting the old royal sibling marriage tradition. It was divine branding, wrapped in linen. Their union is carved in stone, praised in hymns, and celebrated as cosmic. In reality, it is also politics. A sibling marriage keeps power locked within one circle. No in-laws to bribe, no external families to balance. Just one dynastic knot tied tighter than ever. Did they love each other? Hard to say, but they certainly performed love in public. Their statues show them side by side, their names inscribed together. Egyptian priests probably nodded politely, murmuring, "Yes, this looks familiar," while Greek courtiers tried not to stare too hard at the family tree. The Ptolemaic palace in Alexandria becomes a stage for such unions. Grand halls, mosaic floors, perfumed chambers, Greek architecture with Egyptian ideology. A hybrid of cultures, but the same old rule. The bedroom is where dynasties are secured, alliances cemented, and occasionally scandals erupt. Because, of course, scandals erupt. By the time we reach Ptolemy VIII, nicknamed Physcon, meaning fatty, which tells you how popular he was, the palace has turned into a soap opera. He marries Cleopatra X, then also marries her daughter Cleopatra III. Yes, you heard that right. Mother and daughter, both queens of the same man. Imagine the dinner seating chart. This triangle produces one of the most chaotic family dramas in Egyptian history. Cleopatra II revolts, Alexandria burns, and the royal family turns its bedrooms into battlegrounds. It's incest plus civil war, all rolled into one linen sheet. Through all of this, Egyptian tradition persists. Queens are powerful partners, not just footnotes. Their names appear on inscriptions, their faces on coins. They are great royal wives, even when the crown is worn by men with Greek accents. And finally, standing at the end of this long parade, we find Cleopatra VII, the Cleopatra. Though to her contemporaries, she is just one more Ptolemaic queen, the last, as it turns out. Her bedroom is not hidden in Thebes or Memphis. It is staged in Alexandria, a cosmopolitan city of marble colonnades, lighthouse towers, and a library so famous it's still mourned. Cleopatra uses her private life as foreign policy. Her liaisons with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony are infamous. But behind the tabloid gloss is practical strategy. Egypt in her time is cornered between Rome's ambitions and its own declining independence. Cleopatra chooses intimacy as diplomacy, and in doing so, she continues the very old Egyptian tradition. The bedroom is politics by other means. Her relationship with Caesar secures her throne when rivals threaten. Her children with Antony, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, Ptolemy Philadelphus, are dynastic bets placed on the roulette wheel of Roman power. It doesn't end well, but the attempt is pure Egyptian logic. Preserve the throne through the intimacy of rulers. What makes Cleopatra different is how much the world remembers her. Earlier queens were powerful, but their stories faded into broken hieroglyphs and tomb dust. Cleopatra's story survives because Rome couldn't stop talking about her. To some, she was temptress. To others, political genius. To us, she is a reminder that Egypt's bedrooms were always more than private spaces. They were theaters of empire. So by the time Egypt finally becomes a Roman province, the tradition is centuries old. Pharaohs and queens shared beds not just for love, but for lineage, theology, and diplomacy. From the lion-footed beds of Thebes to the marble chambers of Alexandria, the same principle held true. The bedroom was as political as the throne room. And if you listen carefully, past the marble echoes and temple hymns, you can still hear it. The quiet rustle of linen, the faint smell of Chi-Fi incense, the sigh of queens calculating futures, the hush of pharaohs dreaming of eternity. The lamps in Alexandria flicker against marble columns. The waves of the Mediterranean slap softly against the harbor walls. And in the royal palace, a queen adjusts the linen folds of her gown with the ease of someone who knows the world is watching. This is Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh, the woman whose bedroom has been mythologized, dramatized, demonized, and still cannot be ignored. To the Romans, she was a temptress. To her people, she was a savior. To history, she is both and something stranger. But tonight, we don't need tragedy or fireworks. We just need the quiet rooms of Alexandria's palace. The palace itself no longer stands. Earthquakes and tides dragged it beneath the water, where divers now find its columns. But we can imagine it. Large halls faced with marble, courtyards filled with fountains, mosaics glittering underfoot. The royal quarters opened onto gardens where lotus grew beside olive trees. This was not the mud brick palaces of earlier dynasties. This was Greek luxury dressed in Egyptian symbols. And at the center, Cleopatra's private apartments, rooms scented with frankincense and myrrh, couches draped in embroidered fabrics, bronze lamps shaped like lotus flowers, shelves stacked with scrolls for when a queen needed poetry instead of politics. Now, Cleopatra has often been reduced to her looks. Ancient writers loved to compare her to ideals of beauty. Modern retellings either exaggerate her charms or dismiss them as propaganda. But the truth is more interesting. Coins show her with a strong profile, hooked nose, sharp chin. Not a Hollywood casting choice, but a face of command. Contemporary accounts emphasize not her beauty alone, but her presence, her voice, her wit. She spoke several languages, negotiated with diplomats, and could charm by intellect as much as appearance. So when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BCE, Cleopatra knew exactly what she was doing. The story, polished by legend, tells us she smuggled herself into Caesar's presence rolled inside a carpet or linen sack. More likely, it was a carefully arranged private meeting. But the image survives because it captures the essence. A queen risking everything to be alone with the most powerful man in the Mediterranean. Picture the scene. Caesar, 52, hardened by war and politics, suddenly confronted with a 21-year-old queen who speaks Greek as fluently as he, who references philosophy, who jokes lightly while offering her kingdom as a chess piece. She was not begging. She was bargaining. The bedchamber was not surrender. It was diplomacy. From that night on, Cleopatra secured her throne. Her brother Ptolemy XIII drowned fleeing battle. Her younger siblings became pawns, but Cleopatra emerged as Egypt's sole ruler, now with Rome's most famous man at her side. And yet, remember, this is Egypt. The bedroom was also cosmic. Cleopatra styled herself as Isis, mother goddess. Caesar, whether he liked it or not, could be Osiris reborn. Their son, Caesarion, born in 47 BCE, became the living Horus. To Egyptian eyes, this wasn't just a child, it was continuity of divine kingship. The propaganda wrote itself. Rome, of course, saw it differently. To Roman senators, Cleopatra was dangerous precisely because she turned intimacy into legitimacy. They were used to mistresses, liaisons, affairs, but they weren't used to a foreign queen who used her bedroom as throne room. Let's pause here and remember the ordinary details, because amid the grand politics, daily life still carried on. Cleopatra's cosmetics included kohl for eyes, malachite for shadow, henna for nails. She bathed in perfumed oils, wore linen bleached bright in Egyptian sun, and adorned herself with gold diadems. Attendants combed her hair into elaborate braids, weaving in beads of lapis and carnelian. Meals included figs, honey, pomegranates, roasted fish, and plenty of wine. Musicians played softly in private chambers while cats wandered the cushions. It sounds decadent, and it was. But it was also routine, the background hum of ancient royalty. Now, Caesar eventually returned to Rome. Cleopatra followed, bringing Caesarion. She lived in a villa across the Tiber, and her presence scandalized Roman society. A queen in their capital, with her child, rumored son of Caesar, was too much for conservative senators to stomach. The whispers grew. Cleopatra was not just visitor, she was threat. The bedroom in Rome became a battlefield of gossip. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra fled back to Egypt with her son. She had lost her Roman protector, but she still had her throne. For now. And then came Mark Antony. Antony, triumvir of Rome, soldier, larger-than-life personality. He summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in 41 BCE to account for her loyalty. Cleopatra arrived not pleading, but staging a scene. Ancient accounts say she sailed up the river on a barge with purple sails, gold oars, and herself dressed as Aphrodite. Perfume filled the air, music played, attendants waved fans. Antony was captivated, though probably also impressed at the budget. From then on, Cleopatra and Antony became entwined. Was it love? Ancient sources disagree. Was it politics? Undeniably. Antony needed Egypt's wealth. Cleopatra needed Rome's protection. Together, they became a myth in their own lifetime. Their private life, though, was not so private. Stories spread of their banquets, the inimitable livers, a club they supposedly founded for nights of excess. Tales of Cleopatra dissolving a pearl in vinegar and drinking it to show her wealth. Most of these are propaganda, embroidered by hostile writers. But the core truth remains. Their intimacy was performed, publicized, and weaponized. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children. Their bedrooms, once again, became dynastic chessboards. Their union threatened Rome's balance of power, especially to Octavian, the future Augustus. He portrayed Cleopatra as seductress, Antony as corrupted fool, Egypt as exotic danger. Their love became a weapon in Rome's civil war. And when they lost, when Octavian triumphed, Cleopatra's bedroom became stage for her final act. The famous scene of her suicide by asp bite is probably legend. Ancient accounts differ. Some say poison, some say a snake. What matters is how the story was framed. To Romans, she was dangerous foreign queen undone by her own schemes. To Egyptians, she was last of the pharaohs, choosing death rather than humiliation. To us, she is both tragic and fascinating, but strip away the myths, and we are left with this. Cleopatra turned intimacy into strategy. Her bedroom was throne room, embassy, and battlefield. Her alliances with Caesar and Antony were not accidents. They were deliberate, calculated, and rooted in Egypt's long tradition of queens wielding power through personal as well as political ties. The irony is that Rome, for all its bluster, never forgot her. Cleopatra outlived her own dynasty in memory. Nefertiti fades into broken statues, Ta into scarabs, Nefertari into tomb paintings. Cleopatra lives on in every retelling, precisely because her bedroom became history's favorite stage. And so, when we whisper about the bedrooms of ancient pharaohs, Cleopatra's linen rustles loudest, not because she was unique, but because she was last, the final echo of a tradition where queens could turn private chambers into instruments of empire. Tonight, though, we let her rest. The marble palace is gone, sunk into sea. The mosaics are broken, the scrolls burned, the perfumes dissipated. Only the myth remains. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, reclining on her couch, turning her head slightly, speaking softly, eyes sharp, calculating the future in whispers. The torches dim, the Nile flows on, and Egypt sleeps at last, even if history never lets it. The air is drier here, the Nile runs slower, quieter. We've drifted backward to the Old Kingdom, an age of pyramids, stone temples, and kings who wanted eternity carved in limestone. Their public monuments are immense. Their names thunder across millennia, and yet their bedrooms, small, shadowed, private, held the same fragile humanity as any that came later. Let's start with Sneferu, the first great pyramid builder, father of Khufu. He reigned around 2600 BCE and left behind not one, but 3 pyramids, because apparently he believed in bulk orders. The bent pyramid, with its strange angled slope, the red pyramid, first true smooth-sided giant. Sneferu liked perfection, or at least persistence. And behind the monuments was a household. Sneferu's queen was Pharaohs I. She lived long enough to see her son Khufu rise to the throne. Her tomb was found near the Great Pyramid, filled with furniture that still glows with gold leaf, cedar, and silver. Her bed canopy inlaid with gold, her headrest curved and polished, her jewelry sparkling after 4,000 years. It is one of the rare times archaeology lets us peek directly into a queen's bedroom. Picture it, a bed frame of gilded wood, legs shaped like lion paws, a canopy overhead to drape fine linen, a headrest of alabaster. Chests filled with combs, mirrors of polished copper, bracelets of turquoise and carnelian. It's both intimate and monumental. One woman's room preserved because it was buried, not lived in. Yet in its silence, we hear the rhythm of Old Kingdom palace life. Pharaohs bore Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, and here, the royal bedroom becomes dynasty incarnate. The Great Pyramid is less a tomb than a monument to succession. Khufu's consorts, like Meritites Ai and Henutzen, are shadowy figures, remembered mostly by their tombs near his pyramid. Their presence was architectural. Their tombs cluster around his like satellites around a planet. In life, they shared his household. In death, they kept orbit. The Old Kingdom bedrooms weren't about scandal so much as stability. The ideology was simple. The king is the axis of cosmos. His queen is the partner who ensures continuity, and their children are the next links in chain. But humans being humans, there were still rivalries, favorites, and politics in the sheets. Consider Khafra, builder of the Second Great Pyramid and probably the Sphinx. His queens include Qamar-Nebti and her daughter Qamar-Nebti, who both held prominent roles. Their titles appear on tombs, their statues carved in serene poses. They remind us that queens were more than decoration. They carried lineage in their names. By the time we reach the 5th and 6th dynasties, royal wives multiply. Polygamy was the rule for pharaohs, though not for commoners. The palace would have housed numerous wives, children, attendants. The so-called harem was less a romantic retreat than a small administrative city, with scribes, kitchens, workshops, guards. The royal bedchamber was the core, but around it pulsed an economy. Linen weavers, perfume mixers, jewelers, wig makers, all feeding the machinery of dynasty. And yet, quiet moments existed. Imagine a queen reclining on her gilded bed, attendants braiding her hair, musicians plucking harps, the scent of lotus oil drifting in air. Outside, stone blocks rose to form pyramids, but inside, the night was soft with lamps and whispered conversation. Scandal, though, does flicker even in Old Kingdom. Later texts hint at intrigue in the court of Pepi II, a boy king who reigned extraordinarily long, perhaps over 90 years. Pepi's domestic life is half myth, half rumor. One tale from much later suggests he favored late-night wanderings and unusual liaisons. Whether true or not, the rumor itself tells us Egyptians assumed the king's bedroom could become the stuff of gossip. Now slide gently into the Middle Kingdom. Centuries later, around 2000 BCE, Egypt has weathered collapse and reunification. The pyramids shrink in size, but literature blossoms, and with it, glimpses of royal intimacy. Pharaohs of this era, like Senusret I, Amenemhat II, Senusret III, ruled with stern efficiency. Their statues show heavy-lidded eyes, grim expressions, furrowed brows, but their households still depended on queens. One figure stands out, Sobek-Neferu. She is the first woman to rule Egypt with full pharaonic titles, around 1800 BCE. Daughter of Amenemhat III, she stepped in when her brother died without an heir. Her reign was short, but significant. She styled herself as king and queen combined, wearing male regalia yet keeping female names. In her case, the bedroom became moot. She left no heirs. But her very presence as ruler shows how royal women could step from behind the bed curtain into throne room when needed. Middle Kingdom texts also show us affection in poetry. Love songs preserved on papyri speak of stolen glances, hearts beating fast, lips longing for kisses. They are not royal documents, but they echo what must have existed in palaces too. Pharaohs and queens may have embodied divine order, but they also loved, flirted, and dreamed in ways familiar to us. And in the architecture of their tombs, intimacy lingers. Couples buried side by side, statues of husband and wife carved together, inscriptions referring to affection as well as duty. The royal bedroom was private, but its echoes carried into eternity. Let's drift to daily routines. The king rises at dawn, attended by servants. He washes in scented water, dons linen kilt, applies kohl to eyes. The queen does the same, perhaps in an adjoining chamber. Together they might share a private meal, bread, figs, honey, beer. They receive officials, perform rituals, review petitions. But at night, the palace hushes, and their rooms become sanctuaries. The bed itself, in these earlier dynasties, is still simple: wood frame, corded base, linen coverings. But the symbolism is heavy. The bed was a microcosm of creation, sky above, earth below, life renewing in the union of king and queen. Fertility wasn't just personal, it was cosmic. The pharaoh's ability to father children was tied directly to his ability to maintain Ma'at, the balance of the universe. No pressure, just the fate of cosmos hinging on bedtime success. Queens, too, had ritual roles. In festivals like the Seed Festival, which renewed the king's vitality, the queen might play part in symbolic unions, dances, and offerings. Their presence in the bedroom mirrored their presence in temple ritual. Human, yes, but also divine. What about children? The nurseries of Old and Middle Kingdom palaces must have been bustling. Archaeological finds of toys, carved animals, spinning tops, clappers, dolls, suggest play was woven into royal life. But behind the toys was expectation. Princes trained for office, daughters married into power. A royal cradle wasn't just rocking a baby, it was rocking the next generation of policy. And here, we pause on the irony. Pharaohs built eternal pyramids, their names carved in stone to last forever. Yet their dynasties rose and fell based on fragile moments in bedrooms. A queen's pregnancy, a child's survival, a whispered plot, a rival favored. These decided the fate of empires. The stone outside was eternal. The linen inside was fragile. Egypt balanced both. So when we lie here tonight, drifting between pyramid shadows and quiet chambers, we glimpse the humanity beneath the monuments. Pharaohs who laughed, sighed, argued, dreamed. Queens who braided hair, whispered lullabies, calculated futures. Children who played with carved hippos while priests prayed for their survival. The great monuments of Egypt began in bedrooms, in quiet unions, in soft linens, in the human rhythms that never make inscriptions. And perhaps that's why these rooms remain so fascinating. They remind us that behind every pyramid is a family. Behind every inscription, a sigh. Behind every pharaoh, a person who slept, dreamed, and woke in linen like everyone else. The lamps go out. The pyramids stand silent. The queens rest in their chambers, and history, for a moment, hushes with them. The sun rises hotter now. The pyramids are ancient already, worn like old bones on the desert horizon. Egypt has shifted into its new kingdom around 1500 BCE. It's an age of empire, wealth pouring from Nubia and the Levant, temples rising with columns tall as forests. But inside the palaces, the bedrooms remain the heart of dynastic life. The New Kingdom palaces were different from Old Kingdom residences. Larger, more elaborate, filled with frescoes of blue lotus and marsh scenes. The walls of Amarna's palaces once glittered with painted ducks and papyrus groves. At Malkata, Amenhotep III's palace, entire floors were painted to resemble pools with fish swimming, because apparently the Nile wasn't enough. The private chambers of kings and queens were set amid courtyards, storerooms, servants' quarters, all buzzing like hives. And at the center, always, the royal bed, carved wood, lion paw feet, linen gleaming white, headrest poised for a god in human skin. Let's meet one of the first great figures of this age, Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut begins her story not in grandeur, but in intimacy. She was the daughter of Thutmose I, married to her half-brother, Thutmose II. Their bedroom was a dynastic contract, not a romantic stroll. He was king. She was great royal wife, and together they secured legitimacy. Yet when he died, she stepped forward as regent for her stepson Thutmose III, and eventually declared herself pharaoh. Now, how does a queen turn a bedroom into throne room? With symbols, of course. Hatshepsut styled herself as the daughter of Amun, conceived when the god visited her mother in divine disguise. In reliefs, we see the god approaching the queen, anointing her womb, declaring the child divine. The message was clear. Her father wasn't just a mortal king, it was a god. Her very conception was staged in bedroom imagery. In life, her bedroom must have been filled with ritual, perfumes, wigs, amulets, servants dressing her in regalia that fused feminine and masculine. In public, she wore false beard and kilt. In private, she probably still enjoyed the same comforts as any queen: linen sheets, scented oils, bowls of figs and honey, musicians strumming harps at dusk. But all of it doubled as legitimacy. Her personal life became performance of divinity. Of course, the gossip doesn't stay silent. Ancient sources, particularly hostile later ones, whispered about her relationship with Sinanmut, her steward and architect. Was it love? Scandal? A partnership of trust? The truth is buried, but the rumors remind us that even the mightiest queen was subject to bedroom speculation. Carved graffiti in tombs even hint at intimate jokes about them. Whether true or not, the whispers show how power always leaks into private space. Next, let's drift to another towering queen, Tia. Tia, wife of Amenhotep III, is one of the best documented great royal wives. She wasn't of royal blood. Her parents were Yuya and Thuya, high-ranking but not pharaonic. Yet Tia rose to become one of the most powerful queens in Egyptian history. Her bedroom would have been luxurious. Malkata Palace sprawled across the west bank of Thebes with painted floors, artificial lakes, gardens heavy with flowers. Tia's apartments were furnished with cedar chests, ivory combs, and jewelry crafted of electrum and lapis. But more important was her presence. She appeared alongside Amenhotep in statues as his equal, same height, same size, same authority carved in stone. Foreign kings addressed her directly in letters, asking her to intervene in diplomatic matters. Her name was inscribed on scarabs celebrating festivals, hunts, and even the digging of a lake in her honor. Imagine the palace at dusk. Amenhotep reclining on a lion-foot bed, Tia seated beside him, scribes bringing clay tablets with foreign correspondence. Together, they decide which alliances to pursue, which princesses to accept into the household, which temples to fund. This was not passive companionship. It was co-regency, played out beneath linen sheets and beside incense burners. Their domestic life, too, must have been lively. They had several children, including Akhenaten, who would one day rewrite religion. The royal nursery must have bustled with nurses, toys, pets, laughter echoing through corridors, even as politics pressed down like heavy stone. Tia's influence was such that when her son Akhenaten launched his religious revolution, she still appears in inscriptions as honored matriarch. Even when the palace shifted to Amarna, Tia's presence anchored continuity. Her bedroom, quiet with incense, was command post as much as retreat. Now, let's float gently toward Nefertari, wife of Ramesses II. Nefertari is remembered less for politics and more for beauty, but don't be fooled. Her very name means beautiful companion, and Ramesses adored her enough to carve her temple beside his own at Abu Simbel. Her tomb, QV 66, is one of the most magnificent in Egypt. Its walls glow with scenes of her embraced by gods, her journey through the afterlife painted in vivid reds, blues, and golds. Even in death, her image radiates elegance. What must her bedroom have been like in life? Ramesses' palace at Pi Ramesses was sprawling, filled with gardens, lakes, halls of columns. Nefertari's chambers likely overlooked courtyards, with balconies draped in linen awnings, beds carved of imported cedar, sheets perfumed with myrrh. Musicians and poets may have performed for her, attendants weaving her hair into elaborate braids, applying ochre and kohl. Ramesses, despite his dozens of wives and children, singled her out. He wrote love poetry inscribed on temple walls, calling her she for whom the sun shines. He built monuments in her honor, ensured her image stood equal to his own. Their intimacy, staged for the gods, became public statement. This was love turned into architecture. And yet, even in her favored position, Nefertari lived within a system. The palace was full of other wives, concubines, children, attendants. The women's quarters must have buzzed with politics, alliances, rivalries. Being great royal wife was not simply about affection. It was about managing a household that could rival small towns. Her bedroom was not just for Ramesses. It was for diplomacy, ritual, and performance. By the time of the later New Kingdom, queens like Ta and Nefertari had set precedents. The great royal wife was no longer just partner, she was co-ruler in many respects. Their bedrooms became political hubs, where foreign letters were read, alliances discussed, rituals performed, where cosmetics were tools of both beauty and ideology, where jewelry was more than ornament. It was theology in gold and lapis. Even the architecture reflected this. In Thebes, the palace complexes included shrines for queens, separate estates, administrative offices. Their bedrooms weren't tucked away. They were integrated into networks of power. But let's not forget the human rhythms. The sound of sandals slipping off at dusk, the soft brushing of wigs, the smell of lotus oil, the laughter of children in adjoining rooms. The queens of the New Kingdom may have been icons, but they were also women who loved, grieved, aged, and dreamed. Their rooms saw both ritual and rest, both strategy and size. And perhaps that is the truest secret of these golden queens. Their power was never only in throne rooms or temples. It was in the quiet authority of their bedrooms, where pharaohs leaned in to ask advice, where perfumes mingled with whispered counsel. The golden light fades a little here. The Nile still rolls, the temples still rise, but the edges of Egypt's empire begin to fray. After the brilliance of Amenhotep III and the theatrics of Akhenaten, after the long reign of Ramesses II, the palaces grow crowded, the bedrooms fuller, the politics heavier. The linen is still washed bright, the headrests still polished smooth, but behind the curtains the weight of dynasty feels heavier than ever. Ramesses II, whom we left with Nefertari glowing beside him, reigned for over 6 decades, longer than most people lived. And while Nefertari was his beloved and monumentalized partner, the palace didn't stop with her. His household included Nofret, another great royal wife, and numerous other consorts and daughters. His children numbered in the dozens. Some estimates climb above 100, which means the royal nursery wasn't a nursery so much as a census office. Nofret herself was no minor figure. She bore sons who would later become heirs. Among them was Merneptah, who eventually took the throne after Ramesses' long reign finally ended, which means that the survival of dynasty ran through her chamber just as much as Nefertari's. Her bedroom was quieter in monuments, but thunderous in genealogy. Now, imagine the palace of Ramesses in the Delta, sprawling halls, columned courts, painted walls alive with marsh scenes and gods. The women's quarters were a labyrinth of rooms, bedrooms, storerooms, workshops, nurseries, servants bustling, scribes tallying linen deliveries, guards pacing quietly outside. Within these spaces, Ramesses' wives and daughters lived lives that were both luxurious and limited. Luxurious in silks, gold, perfumes, musicians, gardens, private shrines. Limited in freedom, privacy, and the weight of expectation. His daughter Bintanath eventually became both king's daughter and great royal wife. Titles held simultaneously. She was his child and later his consort, an arrangement startling to us, but in Egyptian ideology another knot in the web of divine continuity. The gods had married siblings, so pharaohs mirrored them. Bintenath's titles were inscribed boldly. Her presence was official. Her bedroom would have been filled with jewelry, wigs, oils, the paraphernalia of queenly life, but also with the heavy silence of being both daughter and wife in a system that treated family like theology. And then there was Mathorneferur, a Hittite princess. She arrived in Egypt after the peace treaty between Ramesses II and the Hittites, the world's first recorded diplomatic treaty. Her marriage to Ramesses was a symbol of reconciliation. Imagine her journey, leaving Anatolia, riding south to the Nile, entering a palace where language, customs, and gods were all foreign. She would have been given attendants, estates, tutors, her chambers filled with gifts, textiles, and perhaps small tokens of her homeland. But she lived always as foreign bride, her role political, her presence symbolic. The bedroom was less sanctuary and more embassy. As Ramesses' reign wore on, the palace swelled with people. Wives, daughters, sons, grandchildren, attendants, scribes, guards. The private quarters must have echoed with laughter, gossip, prayers, and sometimes arguments muffled by linen walls. The intimacy of one or two royal couples in earlier times had expanded into a small city of consorts. And yet, even amid the crowd, favorites still shone. Nefertari's temple, Isetnofret's sons, Bintenath's dual roles. The royal bedroom was not just shared, it was layered, tiered, structured by hierarchy. When Ramesses finally died, his successors inherited not just the throne but the crowded household. The empire outside glowed with wealth, but its heart beat softly in those private spaces. So tonight, as we let the torches dim, we can imagine Hatshepsut smoothing linen before donning her false beard, Ta reviewing letters by lamplight while Amenhotep rests, Nefertari reclining with Ramesses in painted chambers. Their power was carved in stone outside, but lived in linen inside. And the Nile, steady as ever, flowed past their windows, carrying both glory and silence downstream. His son Merneptah took power as an elderly man, his reign marked by Libyan invasions and the first recorded mention of Israel on a stele. His queens are little known, their names faint in the record. By this stage, the monumental inscriptions shift toward wars, famines, and survival. The intimacy of bedrooms fades into silence. Yet we know they existed. Linen still washed, perfumes still poured, children still born. The private rhythm continued even as the empire cracked outside. In later Ramesside reigns, the women's quarters remained central, and sometimes dangerous. By the time of Ramesses III, as we saw earlier, the harem conspiracy erupted from these very chambers. Ta, a secondary wife, schemed to elevate her son Pentauer. Wax figurines were smuggled into rooms, letters exchanged, guards bribed. The conspiracy shows just how potent the royal bedroom could be, not just in producing heirs, but in producing rivals, plots, and collapse. The papyri describing the conspiracy read like bureaucratic gossip. Lists of the guilty, confessions, punishments. They remind us that behind incense and linen lay ambition, jealousy, fear. The women's quarters were never neutral. They were political landscapes as treacherous as any battlefield. And yet, daily life persisted. Archaeological finds give us glimpses. Beds with wooden frames and woven cord bases, headrests of wood, alabaster, or faience, cosmetic chests filled with coal, malachite, rouge, jewelry boxes packed with rings and amulets, dolls and carved toys for children, musical instruments, harps, flutes, sistrums, ready for evenings of song. Meals in the royal quarters might include roasted goose, beef, fish from the Nile, bread, dates, figs, honey cakes, and plenty of beer and wine. Attendants brought trays, musicians played softly, cats prowled for scraps. The royal bedroom was not only for sleep, it was for feasting, relaxation, conversation, and, inevitably, politics. As the 20th dynasty waned, Egypt's power shrank. Grain shortages, invasions, internal corruption. The palaces themselves decayed, the linen less crisp, the perfumes less plentiful. But the rhythms of the bedroom, love, rivalry, birth, betrayal, carried on. Even when priests and generals began to overshadow pharaohs, queens still mattered. Titles like God's wife of Amun became more significant, transferring wealth and ritual authority to royal women. Their chambers in Thebes, tied to temple estates, became command centers. While the throne weakened, the women's bedrooms in temples quietly grew in influence. And so, in the late New Kingdom, we see the paradox. Palaces still filled with wives, children, attendants, still humming with ritual and routine. But the empire outside crumbling, pharaohs weakened, yet their bedrooms still crowded. Queens less monumental, yet their private influence undiminished. The irony is timeless. Egypt's eternity carved in temples and tombs, yet always vulnerable to whispers in the night, alliances made in linen, plots smuggled in cosmetics chests. So tonight, as we imagine Ramesses under moonlight, the columns casting long shadows, the chambers crowded with laughter, the nursery echoing with children, the consorts whispering prayers to Hathor, the queen adjusting her wig by lamplight, we see not decline, but continuity. The empire may falter, but the royal bedrooms remain constant, spaces where power is born, where love is performed, where scandal waits just beyond the curtain. And the Nile, as always, keeps flowing past the palace walls. The stone is cracked here. The Nile still flows, steady as breath, but Egypt's confidence has worn thin. The age of pyramids and great empires is memory. The Libyans rule, then Nubians, then Assyrians, then Persians. Palaces rise and crumble like sandbanks. But even in this instability, the women of Egypt remain quietly powerful. By now, the idea of the great royal wife, the queen beside the pharaoh, has changed. Pharaohs still marry, of course, still keep households of wives, still father children. But their authority shrinks, their monuments fewer, their palaces humbler. Meanwhile, another role rises in prominence, the god's wife of Amun. What does that mean? Let's pause gently and explain. The title God's wife of Amun had existed earlier. Queens like Ahmose Nefertari held it in the New Kingdom. It meant the queen was ritually married to Amun, the great state god of Thebes. She took part in festivals, handled temple estates, and performed ceremonies. But in the third intermediate period, the role expands dramatically. The god's wife is now no longer simply the queen. She is often the daughter of the pharaoh, installed in Thebes as a kind of spiritual ruler. Her bedroom is not in a palace full of wives and children, but in a temple complex surrounded by priests, treasures, estates, and ritual duties. She lives in semi-celibacy, no heirs of her own, because the title is meant to prevent dynastic rivalries. Instead, each god's wife adopts the next, often her niece or younger relative, ensuring continuity of power within controlled lines. So the bedroom becomes temple chamber. The linens are still fine, the perfumes still poured, the attendants still present. But the intimacy is spiritual, not conjugal. The god's wife sleeps not beside a mortal husband, but in symbolic union with a god. And yet, power flows through her chambers. The estates of the god's wife were enormous: fields, workshops, slaves, herds. Her wealth rivaled kings. She controlled grain, gold, and goods. Priests answered to her. In a way, she was queen in all but name, while the pharaoh, far in the delta, might be little more than figurehead. Let's picture one. Shepenwepetshin, daughter of Osorkon III, installed as God's wife in Thebes around 8th century BCE. She lived in the temple precinct, her titles inscribed on walls, her image carved making offerings. Her household would have been filled with attendants, scribes, musicians, guards. Her rooms decorated with lotus motifs, linen curtains, wooden beds polished smooth, headrests set carefully. The daily rhythm was half domestic, half divine. Later, Amenirtis III, daughter of the Nubian king Kashta, became God's wife as well. She represented the Kushite dynasty that ruled Egypt from the south. Her presence in Thebes was both religious and political, a way for her family to anchor their authority in Egyptian tradition. Imagine her rooms: a Nubian princess living in Egyptian temple apartments, her attendants speaking both languages, her perfumes blending scents of two cultures. The title continued through women like Shepenwepet II, Nitocris I, Ankes Neferibri. Each lived in temple estates, commanding wealth and respect. Their bedrooms weren't filled with gossip of rival wives or cries of nurseries, but with prayers, hymns, and the constant hum of temple activity outside. The irony here is rich. In earlier times, queens influenced pharaohs by whispering in bedrooms. Now, God's wives influenced priests and politics by presiding over temple quarters. The intimacy was still there, but transposed into ritual, into symbolism, into incense-filled silence rather than marital whispers. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Egypt, ordinary royal households still existed. Pharaohs of the third intermediate period and late period, men like Shoshenq, Taharka, Psamtik, still had consorts, still fathered children, still filled palaces with wives and attendants. But their monuments rarely name the women clearly. Their power is diminished compared to the mighty god's wives. And yet the rhythms of the bedroom remain constant. Linen woven, perfumes blended, jewelry fastened, wigs adjusted, cats stretched across mats, musicians plucked harps in private halls, lovers whispered by lamplight. The scale may have shrunk, but the intimacy of royal life never disappeared. Even under foreign rule, Egyptian tradition clung. When Persians took over in the 6th century BCE, their satraps in Memphis and Susa might not have cared for Egyptian rites, but the women of Egypt kept them alive. The gods' wives continued their processions in Thebes, their temple chambers still filled with incense, their wealth still rivaling kings. And by the late period, even as Greek mercenaries marched through, even as Nubian rulers carved their names on pyramids in Sudan, even as Persian armies imposed governors, the gods' wives kept Egypt's tradition glowing like a low lamp in the night. Picture one evening, Thebes quiet under stars, the great pylons of Karnak rising black against the sky. Inside the precinct, the god's wife reclines on her bed, linen crisp, perfumes filling the room. Attendants brush her hair, musicians play softly. A priest delivers records of grain harvests, scribes tally accounts. In her hand, a lotus. In her mind, the weight of ritual. Her body is mortal, her role divine. Her chamber is both bedroom and sanctuary. This is Egypt's resilience. Even when crowns falter, when armies fail, when foreigners rule, the private spaces of women carry continuity. The great royal wives of the New Kingdom turned bedrooms into political stages. The gods' wives of the late period turned temple apartments into dynastic anchors. Different settings, same principle. Intimacy was power. We rarely hear their voices. Their names survive on walls. Their statues kneel in museums. Their titles fill inscriptions. But their daily lives, the laughter of attendants, the creak of beds, the warmth of oil lamps, are almost lost. Almost. And yet, we can still imagine them. The hush of night in Thebes, the rustle of linen in temple chambers, the soft hum of prayers drifting through halls. Women whose bedrooms, though quiet, shaped politics as surely as any throne. So as we drift tonight into the twilight of Egypt's dynasties, we see the pattern remain. Pharaohs may weaken, empires may crumble, but the bedrooms of queens, whether in palaces or temples, continue to anchor the Nile's rhythm. The lamps flicker low. Thebes breathes softly. The god's wife lies down upon her polished bed, Beth's amulet at her side, dreams carried by incense. Outside, the priests chant. Outside, the stars shine over the crumbling empire. But inside, the chamber holds power still, and the Nile, eternal as breath, keeps flowing by. The waves slap softly against Alexandria's harbor. The lighthouse burns steadily, its fire mirrored on the sea. Marble colonnades line the palaces, mosaics glitter underfoot, scrolls pile high in the libraries. And behind all the grandeur, in quieter rooms perfumed with incense, queens sit on couches, braiding hair, whispering strategies, calculating futures. This is the Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek in origin, Egyptian in costume. Foreign kings wearing pharaonic crowns, foreign queens dressing as Isis. The palaces are Greek style with peristyle courtyards, but the rituals are Egyptian. The gods receive offerings in hieroglyphs even while the rulers chat in Greek. And at the center of all this contradiction are the bedrooms. Unlike earlier Egyptian dynasties, where great royal wives were usually Egyptian and chosen for dynastic or political stability, the Ptolemies built a tradition of sibling marriages. It wasn't incidental, it was strategy. Marrying brother to sister kept power within the family, avoiding the dilution of dynastic bloodlines. It also mirrored the old Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris, giving it the air of divine precedent. So the royal bedrooms of the Ptolemies were often shared by siblings. Political, religious, sometimes affectionate, sometimes hostile, but always symbolic. Let's start with Arsinoe II. She was the sister and wife of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. Her title, Philadelphus, literally means sibling-loving, which was not meant metaphorically. Arsinoe's marriage to her brother scandalized Greek observers, but in Egypt it echoed divine precedent. Together, they were styled as Theoi Adelphoi, sibling gods. Their bedrooms, imagined in the palaces of Alexandria, were filled with Greek luxury, couches with inlaid ivory, silver vessels, bronze lamps. Yet they still adopted Egyptian ritual. Arsinoe is depicted on temple walls, making offerings like a traditional great royal wife. In her chambers, Greek perfumes mingled with Egyptian kaifi. Attendants spoke both languages, and the sheets were woven linen as bright as any in Thebes. Arsinoe's influence was immense. She appears on coins, unusual for a queen. She held estates, temples, and her cult spread after her death. Her bedroom was not a private sanctuary. It was a political arena where sibling marriage became both statement and strategy. Next, drift forward to Berenice II. She was queen in the 3rd century BCE, married to Ptolemy III. Her fame comes partly from legend. She vowed to sacrifice her hair to the gods if her husband returned safely from war. When he did, she cut her locks and dedicated them in a temple. The hair vanished, but court astronomers explained it away by saying the gods had placed it in the sky. The constellation Coma Berenices. Romantic? Yes, but also propaganda. Her vow and sacrifice tied her personal life to the success of Egypt's armies. Her bedroom was once again political stage. The intimacy of wife and husband woven into the cosmos itself. And then, the other Cleopatras. Because before Cleopatra VII, there were 6. Cleopatra II was not a sibling wife, but a Seleucid princess from Syria. She married Ptolemy V, cementing peace between Egypt and the Seleucid kingdom. Her arrival in Alexandria must have been dramatic. Foreign bride entering a court where sibling unions were norm. Her chambers would have been stocked with gifts, attendants, perfumes, silks, but also heavy with expectation. She bore sons and secured succession. When Ptolemy V died, she ruled as regent for her child, one of the few Ptolemaic queens to rule independently. Her bedroom was less conjugal, more administrative, a mother anchoring dynasty through widowhood. Cleopatra III and IV. These 3 are a tangle of rivalry, marriage, and scandal.
Cleopatra II married her brother Ptolemy VI. When he died, she married her other brother Ptolemy VIII, known unflatteringly as Physcon, fatty. If that sounds awkward, it gets worse, because Ptolemy VIII also married Cleopatra II's daughter, Cleopatra III. Yes, mother and daughter queens of the same man. Imagine the palace dinners. Polite conversation, furious silence, the occasional thrown goblet. Cleopatra II eventually turned against Ptolemy VIII, sparking civil war. Alexandria burned, statues toppled, and her own daughter became rival. The royal bedrooms here were not sanctuaries. They were battlegrounds. Every bed carried political weight, every union a weapon. Cleopatra III herself wielded immense power. She co-ruled with Ptolemy VIII, then with her sons. Ancient sources accuse her of ruthless ambition, favoring one son over another, plotting against rivals. Whether fair or not, the reputation stuck. Her chambers must have been filled with attendants whispering about alliances, scribes carrying messages, perfumes masking the tension of family politics. Cleopatra IV had a briefer, more tragic path. Married off to her brother, then discarded, she fled and married Antiochus IX of Syria. She died young, a casualty of dynastic games. Her bedroom was never her own. It was always staged for others' power. And then, Cleopatra V and VI, shadowy figures, often confused in records. Their names surface in inscriptions, vanish in gaps. They remind us that not every queen leaves a legacy. Some lived, married, bore children, and were swallowed by history's silence. Their bedrooms existed, but only as faint traces. What unites all these Ptolemaic queens is this: their private lives were never private. Sibling marriages shocked Greeks but legitimized their rule in Egypt. Foreign brides tied peace treaties together. Mothers became regents, daughters became rivals. Their bedrooms were embassies, war rooms, stages for myth. Daily life still persisted amid the scandal. The palaces of Alexandria shimmered with Greek luxury and Egyptian tradition. Queens reclined on couches, ate figs and honey, sipped wine, adjusted wigs and jewelry, listened to musicians. They prayed to Isis in shrines, poured libations to Greek gods, perfumed themselves with oils from Cyprus and frankincense from Arabia. Cats prowled across mosaic floors, scribes whispered updates, servants carried trays of bread and fruit. The rhythm was familiar, the trappings grander. And yet, always beneath the surface was rivalry. A queen might be beloved one day, supplanted the next. A daughter might become co-queen with her mother, then rival. A husband might share his bed with two women from the same family, forcing alliances and betrayals across the linen sheets. This is the paradox of the Ptolemaic bedroom. It was more crowded, more scandalous, more politicized than almost any before, and yet it continued the old Egyptian tradition, intimacy as legitimacy. Whether with siblings, daughters, or foreign brides, the unions were never only personal. They were dynastic weapons. By the time Cleopatra VII was born, the stage was already set. Her dynasty had centuries of sibling marriages, rival queens, political bedrooms. She inherited not just a throne, but a tradition where her private life would always be public politics. So tonight, as we let the marble corridors of Alexandria fade, we can imagine Arsinoe reclining with Ptolemy II under embroidered sheets, coins bearing her image struck in nearby workshops. We can picture Berenice cutting her hair by lamplight, whispering a vow to the gods. Cleopatra II, glaring across the table at Cleopatra III while Ptolemy VIII eats in uncomfortable silence. Cleopatra YA, rocking her child in a cradle, calculating alliances. Cleopatra III whispering strategies to attendants while deciding which son to favor. The palace is noisy with scandal, but the rooms themselves are quiet. Lamps burning low, linen rustling, perfumes hanging in the air. These were bedrooms where love sometimes flickered, but power always slept. And outside, the harbor of Alexandria glowed with ships, traders, soldiers. The city buzzed with life, but the true empire rested in the quiet chambers of its queens. The torches dim, the linen rustles softly. The Ptolemaic queens close their eyes, calculating futures even in dreams. And the Nile, eternal, carries their whispers into the sea. The palace is quieter now. The waves of Alexandria's harbor still lap against the shore. The lighthouse still throws its firelight into the sea, but the last pharaohs pace their chambers with heavier steps. Their beds creak with uncertainty. Their perfumes cannot mask the smell of decline. The marble mosaics sparkle, but cracks run beneath. Cleopatra VII sits here again. The woman we met earlier, the last in a long line of queens and consorts. She reclines in her chamber, surrounded by attendants braiding her hair, adjusting her jewelry, sprinkling myrrh into the lamps. She knows, perhaps, that the room is both sanctuary and stage. The Romans are at her gates, Octavian sharpening his propaganda quill. But for the moment, in the hush of night, the palace is still hers. Cleopatra's bedroom has been mythologized into seduction chamber, exotic den, snake pit of intrigue. But step softly and we see it differently. It is a place of calculation, routine, and weary persistence. The linen sheets are crisp, the couches carved of ivory, the floors laid in mosaics. Musicians pluck lutes softly, children's voices echo faintly from adjoining rooms. And yet, every whisper is political. Every sigh is strategy. Her alliances with Caesar and Antony, we've traced them already.
Now, in her final years, those choices echo louder than ever. Rome has painted her as temptress, Antony as corrupted lover, Egypt as dangerous exotic. The bedroom has been made weapon against her. What was once sanctuary is now stage for Rome's victory speeches. We don't need to dramatize her death. The asp, the poison, the final embrace, all of it is legend told and retold. What matters for us tonight is the irony. Cleopatra, last of the pharaohs, did not fall in temple or battlefield, but in her private chambers. The bedroom was the throne room of her end, the place where intimacy, power, and silence merged into history's final whisper. And with her death, Egypt became Rome's province. The bedrooms of pharaohs went silent, their linen sheets folded away, their perfumes replaced by Roman oils. The great tradition of queens as co-rulers, consorts, mothers, and God's wives faded into marble villas and Roman matrons. The old rhythm of Bess amulets by bedsides, of priests whispering prayers for fertility, of queens reclining with power heavy in their silence. All of it dissolved into empire. But history does not end neatly. It drifts. Think back now, to the Old Kingdom, where Hetepher's gilded bed was buried beside her pyramid. To Khufu's queens, their tombs clustered around his like satellites in orbit. To Khafra's wives, serene in stone statues. To Pepi's whispered scandals, whether true or not. Think of the Middle Kingdom, where Sobekneferu ruled alone, her chamber both kingly and queenly, where love poetry sang of longing glances, echoing what must have been whispered in palaces too. Think of the New Kingdom, golden with Hatshepsut's divine conception carved in reliefs, Tia's co-rule beside Amenhotep, Nefertari's radiant tomb glowing like eternal perfume. Think of the Ramessides, where bedrooms were crowded with wives, children, foreign brides, and sometimes conspirators, where Ta's wax figures plotted in shadow, where Pentaware swallowed poison. Think of the gods' wives of Amun, their temple apartments rich with estates, their beds not for heirs but for ritual, their chambers filled with incense instead of children's cries. And finally, think of the Ptolemaic queens, from Arsinoe II with her sibling marriage, to Berenice with her hair in the stars, to Cleopatra II and the Third with their rivalries, to Cleopatra VII with her Roman entanglements. Across 3,000 years, one thread runs steady. The pharaoh's bedroom is never just private. It is always political, always cosmic, always stage for dynasty. And yet, amid all the rituals and scandals, daily life persisted. The brush of wigs on combs, the drip of oil into lamps, the laughter of children in nurseries, the creak of beds at night, human rhythms behind divine pretensions. What makes this so soothing, perhaps, is the contrast. Outside, monuments tower, wars rage, empires collapse. Inside, the queen smooths her linen sheets. The pharaoh sips a cup of beer, the cat curls on a cushion. Eternity outside, fragility inside. And so, as we close this long wandering tonight, we let the curtains fall slowly. The great royal wife adjusts her jewelry one last time. The pharaoh leans back against a lion-pawed bed frame. The musicians put down their harps. The lamps flicker lower. The nursery hushes. The scribes roll their papyri. The perfumes fade into the night air. Egypt sleeps. The pyramids stand silent. Temples echo empty. Palaces crumble. Mosaics sink beneath the sea. But the intimacy of those rooms lingers still. The faint whisper of linen, the sigh of queens, the quiet calculations of pharaohs in the dark. And the Nile flows on, eternal. carrying with it the secrets of the bedrooms of Egypt's rulers, secrets that were never just about love or scandal or power, but always about all three, entwined forever. So close your eyes now. Let the linen rustle softly. Let the torches dim. Let the river's breath carry you into sleep. Because history, like Egypt, never truly ends. It just drifts quietly into the night.